I don't even know how he drives this car. He'd never driven a racing car as bad as a 1977 Ferrari 312 T2. It was just undrivable. There was no grip at all. That's one of the reasons Niki Lauda didn't do that race and didn't want to do the Japanese Grand Prix either. It was a very, very difficult car. Anyway, Gilles, being Gilles, just gave everything he had and did a very good job that weekend. And after a difficult Japanese Grand Prix, got rehired by Ferrari for 78. And the rest is kind of history. But my fondest memory of Gilles is not only the day he won here in Montreal, in the snow in October in 78. It was actually the first Grand Prix he led, which was the Long Beach Grand Prix in 78 in that Ferrari T3 as it was then, a much better car. And Gilles and I were staying at the Holiday Inn by Long Beach Airport, not LAX, but Long Beach Airport. It's where the Ferrari team were. And I remember on the Monday morning after the race, Gilles was down in the lobby and he had all his bags with Joanne and they're all getting ready. And he showed me his helmet. He said, "Look, Peter, there's no oil on it." I was leading the race, and the look on his face, he was just like, "I'm never going to touch that helmet again. All it's got is bugs and flies with no oil." And that was Gilles. You know, he loved those little details. And we used to have amazing moments. Every Brazilian Grand Prix, and I don't know why it became a tradition, but every Brazilian Grand Prix, Gilles and I would share a road car to the track every day. And it wasn't sharing in the sense that I would do any driving. I would sit there in awe because this young Canadian had a basic philosophy of driving on the road, which was very simple, 2 words, never stop, which meant if there was a traffic light, just go on the pavement, get around the traffic there, handbrake turn here, down between the traffic here. The guy was just unbelievable. It was total magic. But another thing I never forgot about Gilles was he always drove with both hands on the steering wheel, even though he was doing these incredibly crazy things on the road in Brazil. So by Brazilian standards, I suppose they were fairly acceptable. But even though he was doing that, he said, "I always keep both hands on the steering wheel." It's something I was taught by my first ever driving instructor in race driver school here in Canada. He said, "Gilles, always have both hands on the wheel because then you're going to be in a better position to control the slide when it happens." And even in that little road cars, it was Fiat 127 at the time, he had both hands on the wheel. That was Gilles. And another funny thing he said to me once was, it was when Formula One was getting more and more downforce and the wings were getting bigger, and actually it was quite difficult to get the car sideways because if you went sideways you were starting to destroy the tyres and it wasn't the quickest way to win a race. And I remember Gilles saying there's got to be something wrong in motorsport if going sideways isn't quick. Because Gilles only knew one way to drive and that was sideways. What a guy. Very sadly missed. We had a lovely 30-year commemoration of his career last year in Italy with a friend of mine, another friend of mine who owns the Ferrari T4 that Gilles raced in 79. We had that amazing race with René Arnoux, who we were just talking about, at Dijon. You've probably all seen it on YouTube. They changed places about 6 times, they bashed wheels. Eventually Arnoux wins the dice for reasons that were technical rather than anything to do with the driving. But anyway, that Ferrari is owned by a friend of mine. And last year at this event, we had René Arnoux along to drive Gilles' Ferrari in Italy from a little town in which Tazia Nuvolari was born to another town in which sits this starfighter jet that Gilles wants to do a drag race with. He in the Ferrari Formula One car and the starfighter from the Italian Air Force. And they did a drag race up to takeoff point. And Gilles was leading, of course, for about the first 300 meters, then the starfighter just got him. Such lovely memories, and for me, this is the Canadian Grand Prix. I came to that race, as I say, in 78. And Montreal actually hasn't changed that much. It was still the hotel down there was still the Chateau Champlain. The Delta was called the Hyatt Regency, I think, Regency Hyatt. And we all stayed down at the Regency Hyatt. And Gilles would be there, we'd sit in the coffee shop, we'd all get together, and the old pits were down in the rowing area, the far end, and the start was done by the hairpin. But things haven't changed that much, and that's what I love about Canada. The heritage that came from 78, you can still touch and feel today. I hope there's nothing too serious going on there. And you can still touch and feel that heritage. Not many racetracks on the Formula One calendar can you say that about. We have a lot of new super circuits. They don't have a lot of character. For me, personally, I'm often asked my favourite race. I say Australia because that's where I grew up, but then I also include Canada in there for the people, for the charisma, for the heritage, and for the racetrack. Who cares if it rains? Because that's what racing's all about. Let's talk a little bit about this season so far and how well things have been going. I see another friend of mine over there, David Toletti, chassis engineer for a Formula One team that I won't mention here because he'd be very embarrassed, but I work with, can I mention it, David? He works for Ferrari Formula One team, one of the key engineers for Ferrari today, David Toletti. Big hand for him. I was lucky enough to work with David in the early 90s at Ferrari when we had Alan Prost and Nigel Mansell driving for us. Great time, eh? What happened today to Fernando? Okay? Nothing. Okay. Okay, good to see you, David. Gracias. That's another nice thing about Montreal. We keep bumping into all these nice, interesting people. And he's very much incognito. He's been in the paddock today, not wearing Ferrari kit. Not many people know who he is, but he is a serious player when it comes to chassis computation at Ferrari. As I was saying, this year's been, well, it's been a year of different winners. That's a good thing. And I don't know how many people here know F1 Racing Magazine, but that's a magazine that I'm lucky enough to be writing for every month. I have a column and I have a feature. And at the start of the year, long before the testing started in January, I was asked by the editor to write a preview of the season and predict who I thought would win. But Peter, don't be boring, don't state the obvious. That was another little writer. So I thought about it a little bit, and I chatted to a few people, including Adrian Newey of Red Bull, about his feelings for the year ahead, and spoke to a few other people. And I came to the conclusion in my mind that AMG Mercedes were going to have a very good year. And not many people, I think, felt that at that point. Most people felt 2014, new engine regulation, Mercedes will do a great job, that'll be a big year for them. Most people were thinking that Mercedes would just carry on more or less as they did in 2012. A car that's quick on occasions, but not consistently so. I have a different take on that. Aldo Costa, one of the ex-Ferrari engineers, is now with the team. He's been with the team for 18 months. He's had time to integrate himself. He works very well with Ross Brawn. They have other very good engineers now who've joined. They have Lewis Hamilton. They have a very, very good engine. I think a slightly better engine than the Ferrari or the Renault. And I think in a year where there are going to be limiting factors like this tyre situation that we have at Pirelli, and indeed downforce that's kind of more or less the same now amongst the top teams, engine power will become a factor. And I believe on circuits like this in Canada, which are quick, Silverstone coming up, Spa coming up, Monza, other circuits, I think we'll see the Mercedes car gathering momentum and gathering pace. And so I went out on a limb and I predicted that Lewis Hamilton would win the World Championship this year. A lot of people thought I was crazy. A lot of people probably still think I'm crazy. And many people would say, well, if it's going to be Mercedes, it might well be Nico Rosberg. And it could well be. But I think Lewis has it. And I think Lewis here in Canada this weekend looks like a driver who's very sharp, very mean. And I was personally very impressed with how angry he was after qualifying. And he was second. That's a very good sign if a racing driver's annoyed. And it was quite funny in the press conference afterwards because the question of Bob Consideris, a lovely guy, a very good friend of mine, was talking to Lewis and saying, how did it go, Lewis? And Lewis was quite monosyllabic, not saying much, looked a bit miserable. And it's kind of fashionable in the media center to be a little bit anti-Lewis, you know, to criticize the tattoo or the earring or the dog or whatever it is. I only look at guys and base them on what they do in a race car. That's always been my philosophy, and what they do out of the race car is kind of not my business. And so it was kind of, you could see the momentum building up, that all the journalists were a bit annoyed that Lewis wasn't being the usual friendly guy that he could be. And so Bob said to Lewis, so why are you so upset? And Lewis just looked at him and didn't say anything at all. And I think that look said 1,000 words. And the words were, if you don't know why I'm upset, you don't know what being a racing driver is all about. I just made a mistake. I could have got the pole. What do you want me to be? Happy? And that's Lewis Hamilton. And I really respect that about the guy. A lot of people like to criticize him, as I say, but for me, he's an outstanding racing driver, as is Nico Rosberg. Both of them. What a brilliant team this is. And what a look they have. I think the whole team just looks wonderful. And I'm very impressed also with the whole BlackBerry poster situation down there, and how cool it looks to be doing those original posters. So if you haven't got one, do so. It'll be a memento of a great weekend. Other news, Fernando Alonso and Ferrari are back. They're winning races and they will win more races and they will be in a fight for this championship right to the end. You can be sure of that. So if you're a Ferrari fan, and I assume you are, sir, Ferrari fan? Yeah, Ferrari, you're going to be in good shape all year. It's going to be a great year. And obviously it goes without saying, Red Bull are always going to be there. They have a brilliant engineer in Adrian Newey. He has a great engineering team around him. They have two phenomenal racing drivers. They have great engines, and so they will be there. And already we've seen Sebastian win twice this year. Webber's due for a win. He could easily do it tomorrow if the conditions are a little bit funny. So it's an amazing year again. We've said throughout 2012 how close it is, how competitive it is. 2013 is going to be more of the same. So let's get hands up here. Who here thinks that Sebastian Vettel's going to be world champion this year? Raise your hand. I would give that about 8%. Okay, 8% of the population here. Who thinks that Fernando Alonso will be world champion this year? Yeah, we're getting up to, yeah, that's about a 45-50%, I'd say. Who thinks Nico Rosberg can be world champion this year? We got a lady here, that's good. Who thinks Lewis Hamilton, like Peter Windsor, can be world champion this year? I'll tell you what, that's not a bad. So Lewis Hamilton just behind Fernando. I didn't include Mark Webber. Mark Webber, any Webber fans here? There we go. Yeah, good day there. Here you go. Yeah. Mark's a good bloke. Don't write Mark Webber off. The guy is seriously quick still. He just needs a few things to go right. Admittedly, he always has to beat a very quick teammate, said Vettel, but this guy is still a race winner and he can pull one out of the bag at any given moment. So it's quite impressive, I think, to see that some people here, quite a lot, think that Lewis can do it. Even though at the moment, Nico's been a little bit quicker in the car, or had better results, let's put it that way. Okay, let's have some other questions. Who thinks that the Canadian Grand Prix is the best Grand Prix of the year? Sure. Now I'm going to do some other stuff. I'm going to nominate my top 5 drivers. Wow, it's going to be difficult. 5 is very, very difficult to do, but I'm going to have a go. I'm going to nominate as number 1 the driver that grew up, with whom I grew up as my idol. He was the guy winning everything. He was dead cool. He was quite shy. He didn't really do many interviews, even though they didn't have microphones too much in those days. Even then he shied away from them. But he won race after race after race. And he drove mainly a green and yellow car. And mainly he had light blue overalls and a dark blue helmet. And he never changed the color scheme, unlike some drivers today. And he was called Jim Clark. He was a farmer on the Scottish borders. He always drove for Team Lotus. And when I was a kid, he was winning everything. And I grew up in Australia, as I say. And Jim Clark and other Formula One drivers used to come out to the Australian series every January, February and race out there, effectively in Formula One cars. But as a kid, I went to the airport to meet these drivers when they would fly into Sydney. You could ring up the airline in those days and say, can you tell me if Mr. J. Clark or Mr. J. Stewart is on this flight from Auckland, New Zealand? And TAA or Ansett Airways would say, yeah, they're on this flight, and they're not on that flight. They'd be very open. And I'd rush out to the airport, not to see the Beatles, not to see the Apollo 11 guys. I'd go out to see Jim Clark. And the point of the story is that in '68, I'd done this about 3 years in a row. In '68, Jim Clark said, hey, you're here, come and have a coffee. And I sat down with Jim Clark for about half an hour and chatted to him as if he was just a friend. A month later, he was killed. I was probably the last guy in Australia to speak to him. And I still remember virtually every word of that conversation. And if there's anybody here today that would like to work in motorsport, would like to work in Formula One, I can only repeat the words that Jim Clark said to me when I said that to him. I said, Jim, one day I want to work in motorsport. I don't know how to do it. Or maybe I'm a journalist, maybe I'm And Jim just said, look, if you want something badly enough, never ever give up. You'll make it. And I never forgot that. It's always been my mantra. So Jim Clark is my number 1 driver. My number 2 driver, this is only a personal thing. Who here would rate Jim Clark as their number 1? Anybody here remembers Jim Clark? Yeah, good. Thank you, sir. He won the first Canadian Grand Prix, 1967 Canadian Grand Prix at Mosport. So he does have a special place, I think, in Canadian motor racing as well. For my second driver, I would go for Sterling Moss. For me, he's a driver that I never saw what I read about Sterling, he was the Michael Schumacher, the Fernando Alonso, the Sebastian Vettel, all molded into one, and he just dominated his era. He was quick thinking. He invented sponsorship and management before sponsorship and management existed. He was always outcycling his opposition, and he was incredibly quick. So I go for Sterling Moss second. Number 3 is a very, very difficult one. Very difficult, because we're talking all the eras now. But I think, you know what? I wouldn't.